Moving over to the middleweight division now, we got Jacob Malkoun coming in at -140, going up against the human fire hydrant, Finney, who comes in at +120. Starting off on the Malkoun side of things, he's been dealing with a lot of injuries in this half of his career. The most recent culprit has been a bulging disc in his lower back, and that's kept him out of competition for nearly 2 years. Last time around, we saw him go up against Andre Petroski in a fight I felt quite confident in him. I felt his constant forward pressure, his wrestling, his grappling, his smothering style would have worn Andre Petroski down and led to a either late stoppage or decision win for the Aussie fighter. But he struggled in that first round. Couldn't get off on much success. Even though he was the one constantly on his front foot and pushing Petroski backwards, Petroski constantly landed the better shots, and all three judges scored that first round for Petroski. Unfortunately for Petroski, he started off that second round by ramming his head into the hip of Malkoun, and that threw off his equilibrium, and Malkoun pounced on him and eventually got the TKO finish in the opening seconds of round 2. Probably one of the weirdest and rarest forms of knockouts that we'll ever see. A guy ramming his head into a guy's hip and then just falling over. It was weird in the moment, and I was thankful, obviously, because I had a little bit riding on Malkoun there, but in hindsight, that probably wasn't the best play considering how much closer that fight ended up playing out. Again, I expected Malkoun to start running away with it in deeper water, having the better gas tank, but it is what it is. We didn't end up seeing it take place anyway. This is a guy that could easily be on a 3-fight winning streak had it not been that DQ against Cody Brundage, who I'm going to be talking about in a couple of fights as well. Malkoun was brutalizing Brundage, landing a lot of big ground and pound, but Brundage managed to sneak his head into a place where Malkoun ended up landing some shots to the back of the head and ended up getting DQ'd, unfortunately. Even in his fight against Brendan Allen, he had some good success against a guy in Allen who was a big favorite in that matchup. And I thought that Malkoun would have been able to grind out some positions and at least win 2 of those rounds. He had some good success in that first round, but he just did not land enough damage. And it was Allen who was landing more damage in that round. And that's why all 3 judges scored that first round for Allen. The second round, Malkoun was able to get it back, had a good success in that second round, but then started to fall off with his efficiency in the third round and ended up losing that decision. But it was more competitive than people expected it to be. Malkoun has kind of underachieved in the UFC thus far. His smothering grappling style, his high pressure, high pace, good cardio makes him a very tough cookie to crack, but his durability has kind of bit him in the ass in the past, and that's something to keep an eye on, especially in this matchup going up against the tank that is Finney. Now, Finney looks much more intimidating than he actually fights at times. And nothing is more true than his last win, which was his UFC debut against Robert Valentin. That was a matchup where he controlled over 13 minutes of that 15-minute fight. He went 8 of 17 on takedowns, but he landed a grand total of 4 significant strikes over those 15 minutes. He didn't land a single significant strike in the first or third round of the fight. All 4 of those strikes came in the second round. He got outstruck 23-4 by Valentin, even though Valentin was in a defensive position the entire time. On total strikes, he landed 17 total strikes compared to the 93 that Valentin landed. One judge even scored all 3 rounds for Valentin, even though he was on his back the entire time. One judge, I believe, scored all 3 rounds for Finney, or at least 2 of the 3 rounds for Finney. So Finney only won by split decision, largely because he was in the top position for the entire fight, but just did not get off on enough damage at all. If he has enough of a advantage over his opponents in the grappling realm and skill-wise, he can go out there and finish them, just as he did against Yuri Panfarov and Abdul Irami, which was the fight that eventually got him into the UFC. But he just utilizes his strength and grappling in such a boring manner that I wouldn't be surprised if the UFC just lets him go at the end of his contract or even cuts him after his first loss that he could eventually suffer. He has big power in his hands. He explodes into a lot of his shots that way. But for the most part, he wants to drag opponents to the ground and smother them from that top position and try to find ways to get to a finishing position. But if he can't, he's holding more than he's throwing shots, and that's going to be a big detriment as he fights tougher and tougher grapplers. And that's what he's going up here against with Jacob Malkoun. Both these guys are kind of similar fighters, but Malkoun a little bit better in terms of inflicting damage and threatening with finishing positions. I'm so on the fence about this matchup because the layoff for Malkoun makes this a little bit more challenging of a fight to predict. The strength advantage of Finney makes it a little bit tougher to predict. With Malkoun, he's a guy that doesn't really settle for bad positions. He always finds ways to just creep his head up and start to get in on the hips of his opponents, even if he finds himself on his back. He gets on a hip when he needs to. He's able to find reversals. He throws up submissions off of his back. So I think Finney's going to have to constantly work to try to keep Malkoun down, and that's going to eventually start working in Malkoun's favor. If Malkoun comes in shape, he's going to be able to out-scramble Finney. He's going to have a better gas tank down the stretch. And as long as Malkoun doesn't need a big shot from Finney on the feet, Malkoun could grind this one out. So initially, my thoughts are Malkoun by decision. But if Finney goes out there and wants to prove the doubters wrong and throw with big power, he can absolutely land on Malkoun and knock him out that way. So mixing in the power threat of Finney, mixing in the layoff for Malkoun, this fight's tough to really get a complete edge on, in my opinion, but I will go with the Aussie here. I think Malkoun ends up getting those positions, landing more effective damage over 15 minutes, and I think that leads to him grinding this fight out and winning it on the scorecards.